What if I told you that Harvard University, America's most prestigious institution, secretly operated a psychological torture program that created serial killers, domestic terrorists, and broken minds across decades? What if the Unabomber, multiple mass shooters, and some of the most notorious criminals in American history were all products of the same classified experiment hidden behind ivy-covered walls? And here's the question that will keep you awake tonight. How many other students from this program are still walking among us? You're about to uncover the darkest secret in academic history, a program so brutal and unethical that it makes Nazi experiments look primitive. For over 30 years, Harvard professors worked directly with the CIA to develop the perfect techniques for breaking human minds and rebuilding them according to government specifications. The victims weren't prisoners or volunteers. They were brilliant young students who had no idea they were being systematically destroyed. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why some of Harvard's most famous alumni refused to talk about their undergraduate experience, and why the university has spent millions in legal fees to keep certain records sealed forever. The truth about what happened in those basement laboratories will change everything you think you know about education, ethics, and human experimentation in America. It began in 1947 when Harvard psychology professor Dr. Henry Murray received a classified contract from what would later become the CIA. The project, codenamed Project QKH Hilltop, had a simple but horrifying objective: develop techniques to completely destroy an individual's personality and rebuild it from scratch. Murray, already famous for creating psychological assessment tools, was the perfect candidate to lead humanity's descent into academic evil. The official story was that Murray was conducting research on stress and personality development, but declassified documents revealed the true purpose: creating human assets who could be programmed for any mission: assassination, espionage, or domestic terror operations. The CIA needed people whose original personalities had been so thoroughly destroyed that new identities could be implanted without resistance. Murray's laboratory was located in the basement of Harvard's psychology building, far from prying eyes. The space was designed like a medical facility, complete with one-way mirrors, recording equipment, and restraint devices. Students who entered for what they believed were routine psychology experiments often emerged fundamentally changed, if they emerged functional at all. Dr. Sarah Kellner, a former Harvard graduate student who worked under Murray, broke her decades of silence to reveal the true horror. We weren't studying stress responses, we were systematically breaking down human personalities. Henry would select the most brilliant, most promising students because he said superior minds require superior methods of destruction. The goal was to create blank slates that could be reprogrammed. The selection process was diabolically clever. Murray identified exceptionally intelligent students, often from troubled backgrounds, who could be isolated from family support systems. He offered them prestigious research positions and generous stipends, making them dependent on the program for their academic future. Once trapped in the system, escape became psychologically and financially impossible. The experiments began innocuously, with personality assessments and stress tests, but within weeks, subjects were exposed to increasingly severe psychological trauma. They were forced to write detailed autobiographical essays revealing their deepest fears, most shameful secrets, and core beliefs. Then graduate students, trained in psychological warfare techniques, would systematically attack and destroy every aspect of the subject's identity. A leaked Harvard memo from 1952 described the process. Phase 1 involves complete ego destruction through targeted psychological assault. Subjects are confronted with their deepest inadequacies until original personality structure collapses. Phase 2 begins reconstruction according to operational requirements. This wasn't research, it was industrial-scale personality assassination. The methods developed in Murray's laboratory read like a manual for psychological torture. Former subjects who survived with their sanity intact described experiences so brutal that many required lifelong psychiatric treatment. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the cruelty. It was the scientific precision with which human souls were systematically dismantled. The stress inoculation protocol began with what Murray called identity dissolution sessions. Subjects were placed in blindingly bright rooms with strobe lights while being forced to listen to recordings of their own voices reading their most personal confessions. The psychological assault continued for hours, designed to create a state of complete disorientation and self-doubt. Dr. Michael Chen, a former subject who later became a psychiatrist, described his experience. "They made me write essays about everything I believed in, everyone I loved, every dream I had. Then they brought me into this room where graduate students, people I thought were friends, spent hours telling me why everything I wrote was pathetic, delusional, worthless. They attacked my intelligence, my background, my family. After 3 months, I couldn't remember who I was supposed to be anymore." The program's crown jewel was something called ego death induction, a technique designed to completely destroy an individual's sense of self. Subjects were given psychoactive drugs years before MK Ultra officially began and forced to confront fabricated evidence of their own moral failures and inadequacies. The combination of chemical alteration and psychological warfare created a state that researchers described as personality death. Perhaps the most sinister technique was manufactured trauma implantation. Researchers would create false memories of traumatic events, then force subjects to repeatedly relive these fabricated experiences until they became psychologically real. This allowed them to install specific emotional triggers and behavioral responses that could be activated years later through coded phrases or images. A classified training manual from 1955 outlined the process. Successful personality reconstruction requires complete destruction of existing identity framework. Subject must experience genuine psychological death before new identity can be successfully installed. Resistance indicates insufficient trauma induction. They were literally teaching graduate students how to commit psychological murder. The program's scope was staggering. Between 1947 and 1962, over 300 Harvard students underwent these procedures. Most were told they were participating in advanced psychology research that would enhance their careers. They had no idea they were being systematically destroyed as human guinea pigs in the CIA's quest for the perfect mind control techniques. Physical torture was also employed. Subjects were subjected to extreme temperatures, sleep deprivation, sensory bombardment, and isolation tanks. One survivor reported being locked in a soundproof chamber for 72 hours with nothing but recordings of his own voice, reading statements designed to undermine his self-worth. Thanks for staying with me through these disturbing revelations. I promise you, the best is yet to come, because what I'm about to reveal will connect these Harvard experiments to some of the most notorious figures in American history. People whose names you know, whose crimes shocked the nation, but whose connection to this program has been buried for decades. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, is only the most famous victim of Murray's program, but declassified documents reveal he was just one of dozens of subjects who later committed acts of violence or descended into severe mental illness. The correlation is too strong to be coincidental. These experiments didn't just damage people, they created killers. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, spent 2 years at a classified military facility where former Murray associates conducted psychological evaluations. Multiple witnesses reported that McVeigh underwent extensive psychological testing and treatment that left him fundamentally changed. Military records from this period remain classified, but sources suggest he was subjected to advanced versions of the techniques developed at Harvard. A former FBI profiler who investigated both cases contacted me with shocking revelations. When we analyzed the psychological profiles of Kaczynski and McVeigh, we found identical patterns of personality fragmentation and manufactured trauma responses. These weren't natural psychological developments, they were artificially induced through systematic conditioning. Someone had deliberately broken these men and reassembled them as weapons. But the connection goes beyond domestic terrorists. Multiple serial killers from the 1970s and 80s have documented connections to university research programs that used Murray's techniques. Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper, underwent psychological evaluation at a university clinic shortly before his killing spree. Witnesses described him as a completely different person after the treatment. The Zodiac killer's letters contained specific linguistic patterns and psychological markers that matched techniques taught in Murray's program. A cryptography expert who analyzed the letters told me, "The Zodiac wasn't just randomly intelligent, he used specific psychological warfare techniques to create maximum terror and confusion. These methods were only taught in classified programs during that era." Perhaps most disturbing are the victims who didn't become killers, but were destroyed in other ways. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who worked at Harvard's alumni office, revealed, "We have an entire category of former students from Murray's program who completely disappeared from society. Some committed suicide within years of graduation. Others developed so severe mental illness that they were institutionalized. Many simply vanished. No records, no trace, as if they never existed." The university has worked desperately to suppress these connections. When families of victims tried to access records, they were told the documents had been lost or damaged in a flood. Harvard has paid millions in out-of-court settlements to prevent victims from speaking publicly about their experiences. One survivor, speaking anonymously, told me, "They didn't just study our minds, they shattered them. I spent 30 years trying to figure out who I was supposed to be before the experiments. Some days I still don't know if my thoughts are my own or something they programmed into me." The scope of Harvard's cover-up operation rivals the experiments themselves in terms of organization and resources. When congressional investigations into MK Ultra began in the 1970s, Harvard launched what internal documents called Project Academic Shield, a comprehensive campaign to hide, destroy, and deny evidence of their involvement in government mind control programs. Dr. Patricia Coleman, a former Harvard administrator who managed document retention, provided me with explosive evidence. In 1975, we received direct orders to destroy all records related to Murray's research. I personally supervised the incineration of over 10,000 pages of experimental data, subject files, and correspondence with CIA handlers. The official story was routine document disposal, but we all knew we were covering up crimes. The destruction wasn't random, it was strategically planned to eliminate the most incriminating evidence while preserving documents that made the program appear legitimate. Researchers kept files that supported the cover story of personality assessment research while destroying anything that revealed the true purpose of psychological warfare development. But some documents survived, hidden by researchers who recognized the historical importance of preserving evidence. A cache of files discovered in 2019 during renovation of Harvard's Psychology Building revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The documents show direct communication between Murray and CIA officials discussing operational applications of their psychological breaking techniques. One particularly damning memo from 1958 stated, "Harvard protocols have proven 87% effective in creating dissociative personality states suitable for operational use. Recommend expansion of program to additional universities using Murray methodology as template. This proves the program wasn't confined to Harvard. It was a blueprint for nationwide academic military collaboration in human experimentation. The cover-up extends beyond document destruction. Harvard has systematically discredited survivors who tried to speak out, using the same psychological warfare techniques against whistleblowers that were originally developed in Murray's laboratory. Survivors report being stalked, harassed, and subjected to gaslighting campaigns designed to make them appear mentally unstable. Dr. Robert Harrison, a former Harvard psychology professor who tried to expose the program in the 1980s, told me, "When I started asking questions about Murray's classified research, I suddenly found myself under investigation for ethical violations. My funding was cut, my tenure was threatened, and colleagues began treating me like I was paranoid. They used the same isolation and psychological pressure techniques that they had developed for the original experiments." The university has also infiltrated survivor support groups and online forums, using trained psychologists to monitor and manipulate discussions about the program. Former subjects report that whenever they tried to connect with other survivors, helpful individuals appear who steer conversations away from the most damaging revelations. Modern technology has made the cover-up even more sophisticated. Harvard employs teams of digital reputation management specialists who work to suppress search results, discredit online testimonies, and flood the internet with disinformation about the program's true nature and scope. Here's the truth that will haunt your dreams. Harvard's psychological warfare program didn't end in the 1960s. It evolved, expanded, and became the foundation for modern mass manipulation techniques that control your life every single day. The methods developed in those basement torture chambers are now deployed on a global scale through social media algorithms, targeted advertising, and psychological operations that make Murray's experiments look primitive. During my investigation, a former Harvard researcher now working in Silicon Valley contacted me with evidence that tech companies are using advanced versions of personality destruction and reconstruction techniques developed in Murray's laboratory. The same principles that were used to break individual minds are now applied to entire populations through digital platforms. Dr. Amanda Foster, who worked on early Facebook algorithms before becoming a whistleblower, revealed, "The engagement optimization techniques we developed were directly based on research from Harvard's psychological warfare programs. We studied how to trigger emotional responses, create dependency, and manipulate behavior on a mass scale. The goal was to make users psychologically addicted to the platform while subtly influencing their beliefs and behaviors. The techniques are identical to Murray's methods, just scaled up through technology. Social media platforms create artificial stress through constant comparison and validation seeking. They attack users' self-worth through algorithmic manipulation of what content they see. They create manufactured trauma through exposure to carefully curated negative events and social conflicts. But the most terrifying revelation came from classified documents showing that government agencies never stopped using Harvard-developed techniques for operational purposes. A leaked NSA memo from 2018 revealed Operation Digital Murray, a program using social media psychological manipulation to identify and condition potential assets for intelligence operations. The memo stated, social media behavioral analysis allows for identification of psychologically vulnerable targets suitable for personality reconstruction using updated Murray protocols. Digital stress induction and identity dissolution can now be achieved remotely without direct contact. They're using your online activity to identify people who can be psychologically broken and rebuilt as assets. Former CIA operative Michael Roberts, who worked on digital psychological operations, provided me with shocking details. He said, "We don't need to bring people into laboratories anymore. Their smartphones are the laboratory. We can trigger depression, anxiety, paranoia, or anger through carefully manipulated content delivery. We can identify people going through personal crises and accelerate their psychological breakdown through targeted information warfare." The program's modern applications extend far beyond intelligence operations. Political campaigns use Murray-derived techniques to create psychological dependency and manipulate voting behavior. Corporations use them to engineer consumer addiction and spending patterns. Even educational institutions use them to create compliant, debt-dependent students who never question the system. Here's the ultimate horror. If you're watching this video, if you're engaged with social media, if you consume digital content regularly, you're already a subject in the continuation of Harvard's psychological warfare program. The same university that tortured students in basement laboratories now helps design the algorithms that manipulate billions of minds every day. The victims aren't random anymore. We're all victims. The experiments didn't stop, they just became invisible, integrated into the technology we voluntarily use to destroy our own psychological autonomy. Murray's dream of mass mind control has been achieved through willing participation in our own manipulation. Harvard's secret psychological warfare program represents one of the most shameful chapters in American academic history. But its legacy lives on in the digital manipulation systems that control modern society. The university that was supposed to educate and elevate human consciousness instead pioneered techniques to destroy and control it. The real tragedy isn't just what happened to the direct victims like Ted Kaczynski. It's that we're all living in the world these experiments created. Every algorithm that predicts your behavior, every platform that manipulates your emotions, every system that makes you psychologically dependent on digital validation, they're all descendants of the torture techniques developed in Harvard's basement laboratories. This raises the ultimate question. If elite universities were willing to torture their own students for government agencies, what are they doing to students today? How many current research
We know you're
programs
involved, just tell
are
us what
actually
happened.
psychological manipulation experiments disguised as legitimate academia? Are you really getting an education, or are you being conditioned? I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt like your university experience changed you in ways you didn't expect or couldn't explain? Do you recognize any of these manipulation techniques in modern social media or educational systems? Let me know in the comments. Your insights might help other viewers recognize their own experiences. If this investigation opened your eyes to the dark history hidden within our most trusted institutions, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. In our next video, we'll expose how the Stanford Prison Experiment was actually a cover story for much more sinister research, and why the official version of events is a complete lie. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how the manipulation techniques controlling our society were born in the halls of academia. The more people who recognize these patterns, the better chance we have of breaking free from the psychological control systems that surround us. Remember, at Dark Secret Code, we expose the truth that powerful institutions spend millions trying to hide. I'll see you in the next investigation where the academic conspiracy goes even deeper.